Welcome. For those of you who are with us, we're just making sure that our audio recording and our live streaming is working properly before we get started with our public meeting.
So there we go. Yes.
We're good to go?
Yep.
Thank you. Thank you. I think the superheroes of 2020 have to be IT professionals. They've got us through this year so far. So hello, everyone, and welcome. Earlier this evening, we opened the meeting for council to discuss other non-planning reports, and we're now at the public planning portion of our meeting, with the regular council meeting starting at 7. We'll now get started, and I would like to advise you that this meeting is both audio and video recorded, live streamed, and shall form part of the record, which will be retained according to the town's retention bylaw. And for more information about that collection, please contact the clerk's office. The next part of my script is directed towards providing direction for those who have joined us tonight on our Zoom call and registered as speakers, but I understand from the deputy clerk, we have had no such requests this evening. Is that correct, Deputy Clerk Toma?
Thank you, Your Worship. Yes, that is correct. We do not have any pre-registered speakers this evening.
Thank you. So tonight we have one item on the agenda for information and public consultation purposes. And it's important to note that no decisions will be made this evening. So we will hear from town staff concerning proposed housekeeping amendments to comprehensive zoning bylaw 80-13. And after they have spoken, council will have the opportunity to ask questions and provide comments. Should any member of the public watching the live stream wish to make comment during the meeting, they can email or call Clerk's Services, where the Deputy Clerk will be monitoring for input and will provide your comments to council and town staff during the meeting. Any comments received will become part of the public record. If you do not submit your comments during this meeting, you can still send them in, and then they will be provided to council and town staff. And you will also be added to the circulation list as an interested party, where you will be kept updated on any future information and meetings regarding this item. The email and phone number will be listed on the PowerPoint during the meeting and is also available on tonight's agenda that can be found on our website. We will now hear from the town clerk, Mr. Parkin. Oh, I'm sorry, Councillor Nicol.
Sorry to interrupt, Your Worship. Just noticing that there is audio online, but there doesn't appear to be video. It's dropped off again.
Thank you. Mr. Ross?
Yes, if we could have a short break while I attempt to fix that.
Thank you. How are we doing, Mr. Ross?
Okay, Your Worship, it looks like we are good to go.
Wonderful. Thank you. I'm wondering if I should start at the beginning of the preamble again, given that people are just coming on. So maybe since we just got started, if that's okay with everybody. So welcome everyone and hello. We're earlier this evening, we opened our meeting for council to discuss other non-planning reports, and we're at the public planning portion of our meeting. Now we'll get started, and I would like to advise that this meeting will be audio and video recorded, hopefully, if we've got it working now, live streamed, and shall form part of the record, which will be retained according to the town's retention bylaw. For more information about the collection, please contact the clerk's office. Tonight, we have one item on the agenda for information and public consultation purposes, and no decisions will be made this evening. We will hear from town staff concerning proposed housekeeping amendments to comprehensive zoning bylaw number 80-13. And after they have spoken, council will have the opportunity to ask questions or provide comment. The next part of my preamble is giving instruction to those who had registered ahead of time to speak at the meeting, and there's been none of those this evening, so I'll skip that portion. However, should any member of the public watching the live stream wish to make comment during the meeting, they can email or call Clerk's Services, where the Deputy Clerk will be monitoring for input and will provide your comments to council and town staff during the meeting. Any comments received will become part of the public record. If you do not submit your comments during this meeting, you can still send them in, and they will be provided to council and to town staff. And you will also be added to the circulation list as an interested party, where you will be kept updated on any future information regarding this item. The email and the phone number will be listed on the PowerPoint during the meeting and is available on tonight's agenda that can be found on the town website. We'll now hear from Mr. Parkin, the town clerk, on how the public notice of this meeting has been provided.
Thank you. Thank you, Your Worship. A notice for this public meeting was circulated in the newspaper on November 12th and November 26th, 2020, and circulated 20 days prior to this public meeting to all required agencies. Notice was also put on the town's website and the town's getinvolvedinnisfil.ca website for review and commenting. Information on the proposed housekeeping amendments was also posted on the town's getinvolved.ca for review and commenting.
Thank you. Has any correspondence been received by the clerk's department concerning the proposed amendments?
Yes, we have received one piece of correspondence from the Nottawasaga Valley Conservation Authority dated December 4th, 2020, providing comments on the proposed amendments, specifically the inclusion of a property in the amendment situated on provincially significant wetlands, and also suggesting revised wording to be included in the town, should the town wish to proceed with the proposed zoning amendment on this particular parcel. As well, Your Worship, members of the public may provide comment or register their interest regarding this application during this meeting or up until council makes a decision on the application by contacting the clerk's office.
Thank you, Mr. Parkin. We'll now hear from Stephen Montgomery, Senior Planner, who will provide a high-level summary of the planning context of the proposed amendments. And after his presentation, sorry, the script ends there. So I think after his presentation, we will have the opportunity to ask questions. Mr. Montgomery?
Thank you, Your Worship. If I could just have the ability to share my screen and I can run the presentation.
We can see it now, Mr. Montgomery.
Okay. So Mayor, members of council, staff, and the public, the purpose of this public meeting is to consider a proposed housekeeping amendment to Town Comprehensive Zoning Bylaw number 8013, which is the townwide zoning bylaw. Purpose of the housekeeping bylaw is to update Innisfil's townwide comprehensive zoning bylaw to make changes to reflect new policies, legislation, and regulations, to reduce the number of conflicts that may emerge when applying regulations to development applications, such as, for example, frequent requirements for minor variances to the bylaw where regulation changes may instead be warranted, and to correct mapping and text inconsistencies. The goal is to make Innisfil's development policies more efficient and up to date with current legislation and policies while upholding the spirit and intent of the town's official plan and zoning bylaw. So all of the changes proposed are listed in the staff report before you today, which is DSR 20120. They're also listed on the town's Get Involved Innisfil.ca website. I'll be going through some of the text and mapping changes to provide a broad example of the major changes that are proposed. So first of all, these are some examples of text changes resulting from legislation and also a comparison to other municipal regulations. The parking widths in the current bylaw are much wider than most municipalities. 2.75 meter width is proposed instead of 3 meters, which better reflects other municipal standards found in municipalities such as the town of Lindsay's bylaw, the Blue Mountains, the city of Barrie, and Bradford, West Gwillimbury, among others. It also reflects recommended strategies in the Transportation Master Plan to revisit the town's parking standards. Industrial parking standards for other industrial uses are currently 1 space per 37 meters squared of gross floor area up to 3,000 meters squared, and are proposed to be reduced to 1 space per 45 meters squared up to 2,000 meters squared, which is also more consistent with other municipalities in the area, and also allows more efficient land use in the town's employment areas, in particular Innisfil Heights. Another example from a legislative perspective is replacing the word medical marijuana with cannabis and replacing the reference to the legislation governing marijuana with the most recent act, which is the Cannabis Act. Some example of internal inconsistencies are next. Drive-through stacking lane fences can only be up to 1.8 meters high in the zoning bylaw, whereas currently town engineering standards, it can be up to 2.15 meters high, which is a conflict between the town zoning and the town's engineering standards, which is proposed to be corrected. Another example is the day nursery is not permitted use in the community service zone, even though it is permitted in the associated community space designation, which is the corresponding designation of the town's official plan. So staff are simply proposing to reintroduce day nursery into the CS zone again, because it appears it was inadvertently removed from the previous town zoning bylaw. Another example is, for example, decks higher than 0.2 meters above grade are required to be a minimum of 1.2 meters from the interior lot line or rear lot line in the general provisions, whereas in other areas of the bylaw, they're allowed to be 1 meter. This would harmonize these sections and reduce interpretation conflicts between the general provisions and the specific zone provisions. Next, there's the issue of, I mentioned minor variances, for example. Several variances have been received where sheds, pools, or other structures are proposed in a fenced-off exterior side yard for irregular shaped lots where there isn't much space in the rear yard. Currently, these uses cannot be closer to the exterior lot line than the dwelling. The proposed change would allow them to be closer than the dwelling to the exterior lot line as long as they meet the minimum exterior side yard setback for the zone. Another example is outdoor patios. The only commercial zones permitting outdoor patios are the commercial neighborhood or CN zone and the commercial highway or CH zone. Although the commercial village or CV, commercial tourist or CT, and commercial business park or CBP zones allow restaurants, they do not allow patios as an accessory use. Recently, for example, an owner was asking about doing a small patio in a CV zone that was not permitted. He'd have to rezone the property or perhaps get a use variance through the Committee of Adjustment to permit the patio in Commercial Village. This change would allow patios in these zones as accessory to a restaurant use. And of course, the patios would still be subject to the site plan control process. A third example is Decks, again, currently many variances are occurring for decks, as decks are not permitted to exceed the maximum lot coverage. Many new subdivision builders maximize the lot coverage for the house alone, leaving no additional coverage for a deck. The housekeeping bylaw would allow decks that are less than 1.8 meters in height to only need to meet yard setbacks and minimum landscaped open space, which would reduce the number of variances currently being processed by the town's Committee of Adjustment, even for small decks where the builders have maximized the lot coverage for the dwelling. This proposed regulation is similar to that that exists in the city of Barrie currently. So several mapping changes are proposed to correct inconsistencies in the bylaw. For example, 2014 McNeil Street in Alcona is proposed to be rezoned from residential townhouse exception RT16 zone to open space zone. This land is a parkette and a railroad berm along the railway tracks that's owned by the town and reflects a red line approval that council approved to the Alcona Downs 3 subdivision over the last few years. The open space zone better reflects the parkette and berm use. No residential uses should be permitted on these lands. Next is a property that's municipally addressed as 3811 30th Side Road, which is the hatched red area in the Tiju Woods area. It's come to staff's attention that these lands have a deed restriction that's been in place since the 1940s, which does not allow residential uses, but only conservation uses. We were informed of this by the owners. Therefore, the lands are proposed to be rezoned environmental protection or EP zone. Also, and this is the one change that's in this presentation that is not in the staff report because it was a recent conversation. Last week, staff had a conversation with the owner of this block, which is Block E, Plan 660, where my cursor is. And the owner has also requested a rezoning to EP, environmental protection, to protect the existing trees on this small strip as well. So this is proposed to be included in the final bylaw. And then another example is 3249 second line, which is a little bit more complicated, but I'll try to explain it. This is proposed to be rezoned at the request of the owner to remove the larger area of EP, which is currently on the lands you can see in green in the hatched area. You can see from the 2018 aerial photo on the right, much of what is zoned EP on the left was cleared, and this happened in the late 1960s. However, the Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry provincially significant wetland mapping shows much of this as wetland. Staff are proposing an EPX zone, which would allow the future staking of the wetland woodland feature with the Conservation Authority in the field, and subsequently would allow agricultural uses in parts of what is now EP. Normally what you do is the field mapping first and then rezone the lands based on the boundary established in the field. However, the field work cannot be done until the late spring or early summer, and this housekeeping bylaw would be passed before then. So this would allow the work to be done later. There is one example of a precedent like this in the town's bylaw already, where there's an EP exception that allows a house subject to determination of the limits of the EP area through an environmental impact study, which is similar to this. The alternative to doing it this way would be that the existing mapping would just have to stay the way it is and be changed whenever the next housekeeping or comprehensive zoning bylaw is done, which could be a few years from now. Or if the landowner themselves submits a private rezoning application. And we prefer to at least start the ball rolling on addressing a large EP inconsistency at this point, which is why we're proposing this. In terms of comments received, formally staff have comments from the NVCA on particularly the last property I mentioned, which proposed minor text changes to the EPXH zone, which was shown on the last slide, and stating that their preference is that this matter is deferred. That would mean the mapping changes happen in another housekeeping bylaw at a later date. Staff are in conversation with the NVCA about their comments, and we're engaged with dialogue with them and the MNRF about how to proceed with the landowner's request to remove the EP in an efficient manner. So there are other changes to bylaw which are listed and explained in both the staff report and at getinvolvedmunicipal.ca. This was a summary, high-level summary of major changes. However, the report and website has all the changes. So in terms of next steps, there's no decision tonight on this bylaw. As mentioned, staff will review and consider all the comments received and report back to council at a future council meeting recommending whether this proposed housekeeping amendment should be approved. And notice would be provided respecting when this report is returned to council for consideration to all who requested notification and/or submitted written correspondence for this public meeting. And that includes any correspondence on getinvolved.ca website.
Thank you, Mr. Montgomery. I'll now go to members. Were you finished? I'm sorry, or was there more? No.
I'm sorry, that's the end of my presentation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Montgomery. So I'll go to council for questions. Questions, please, or comments? Councillor Waters.
Just some clarification on that last piece of property you're talking about. You'd mentioned that it's currently EP and they want to change it to EPX. My question is the agricultural piece had been done in the 1960s, you said. What does the ground truthing tell us now in terms of what's actually there? And wetlands are important. Is there any way that this land could be used for green infrastructure down the road, and if we leave it as EP? So I'm just looking in terms of what other opportunities exist for this property as opposed to over to agriculture.
Mr. Montgomery.
Through your worship to Councillor Waters, there may be other opportunities. This has been brought forward to us by the landowner. These lands have been farmed, and there is some concern. They've reached out, I understand, to MPAC about how the property is assessed as well. We've been dealing with the MNRF on it. So really, this is just an exercise of making sure that EP lands that aren't provincially significant wetland, or all provincially significant wetland or significant woodlands in those areas, are simply correctly zoned and allow the uses that they should. So.
Yeah, I was just looking for a clarification on whether or not it's that lands have been currently used as agriculture or something done 50 years ago. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Other questions and comments? Councillor Ossati?
Thank you. I guess the couple of comments or comment that I would have is in regards to the parking width from 3 meters proposed to 2.75 meters. And in Ward 3, especially with a lot of the townhomes and intensification of the large homes, I already experienced many homeowners who start to interlock the little bit of space that they have on their front lawns to allow us additional vehicles, because many of them have difficulty managing the parking for their families if you've got both parents working and possibly another family member. So it's just a concern I have in consideration. Just that we may see more of that happening if the width of the parking is narrowed, especially allowing that in residential homes, that we're going to start. I just believe that we'll start to see more of that. The second one was, I believe I was trying to look it up and I don't remember where it was. I think it was in the cannabis production, something on the cannabis and not being in residential areas. And I want to make sure that those areas that are mixed use is also has the exclusion to not be in the mixed use areas as well, because that has both commercial and the other. So that was the only 2 comments that I had out of the report. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Montgomery, did you want to deal with the width of the driveways?
We have noted that as a concern. The issue with this is we're trying to match what other municipalities are doing. In particular, this would relate to parking stalls, obviously anywhere, but in particular in commercial uses where there's a lot of their land extensive uses for parking. And we're trying to make sure that, we don't make the parking spaces too small, obviously, but at the same time, we're relatively consistent with other area municipalities that have the same concerns with respect to front yards parking. And stone removal and so on.
Thank you. And the cannabis, does it include the mixed use?
I believe Nick Scarrett's on this call. I'm not sure if he could speak to that in this meeting.
Mr.
Nick, are you there? Or?
Hi, Your Worship, members of council. Be more than happy to help answer some of your questions. Just going back to the other question about landscaping in townhouses and low density residential zones. The parking space size or width that's being narrowed does not affect homeowners from interlocking some of their front yard. There's a separate standard in the zoning bylaw that allows for homeowners to widen their property or their driveways up to 60% of their front yard area, meaning that 40% of their front yard area must be landscaped open space, so grass or maybe a walkway or something like that. Now, if they are parking on the walkway, that is still classified as a parking space and could be in violation of the zoning bylaw. So there is a separate section that handles that whole landscaped open space in the front yard and driveway areas. The parking width does not affect that standard. That is we're not touching that. That is staying as status quo right now. Is just with respect to widths, which may allow more homeowners to provide legal parking spaces in their front yard because the widths are smaller. So we actually are allowing homeowners to get more into conformity by allowing more parking within that 60% front yard area and allow maybe a home-based business or people that are working from home due to current situations allow that flexibility. So it does not hamper any landscape open space in the front yard. And then going to the second question with respect to cannabis, as regulated by the AGCO, mixed use zones that we like to call them in planning terms are also pretty much just commercial zones. And by the AGCO and the zoning bylaw, cannabis retail locations are classified as retail stores under the zoning bylaw and are regulated by the AGCO. So they would be permitted in commercial zones subject to AGCO regulations from schools and other provincially and federally regulated criteria.
Thank you, Mr. Scarrett. I saw some hands and now I've Deputy Mayor Davidson and then Councillor Van Berkel. No, he's been answered. Okay, Councillor Van Berkel.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just a comment. I'm glad to see decks and fences in this bylaw that they often come to the Committee of Adjustment. I know I sat on it and they just cost residents a lot of money and staff a lot of time. And so it's good to see that we're going to make some changes there.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? I had two. One of them was again on cannabis, but not on retail, but on production. And I know many municipalities are struggling with medical licenses where doctors have given a person a license for, thousands of plants, and then 4 of those growers can go together and open up a semi-legal production facility. Are they captured under cannabis production, and can we make sure that they are in appropriate spaces? Mr. Scarrett?
Thank you, Your Worship, for the question. We're only changing really the wording of marijuana to cannabis. It does not change any of the provisions for production. They are only permitted in our industrial zones. So the majority of those would be found in Innisfil Heights. To answer your other question about micro grow ops or personal grow ops that people are looking to create under the provincial and federal regulations, we do get a lot of those questions currently. Actually, that they've been reaching out to our planning department quite frequently. Now, majority of those are found on agricultural properties. So you can imagine that the cannabis plant is more of a, they see it as a plant more than medical purposes. In that circumstance, under the zoning bylaw, and the town has been pretty consistent on this interpretation, is that production facilities are not permitted in agricultural zones. So if a property owner wishes to cultivate cannabis for personal use only, they can do so under the provincial and federal regulations, but they cannot do it commercially. That would be in violation of our official plan and our zoning bylaw for production facilities only occurring in industrial zones. So I think that answers your question.
It does and it doesn't. I think it's a discussion for another day because it really is not really about zoning, but about a loophole in the federal health regulation that I know that our federal MP is trying to investigate more. You know, I know that there are some in Innisfil already taking place, but Health Canada has not been forthcoming with letting us know whether or not they're licensed and how much they're licensed for. But I think that's a discussion for another day because it's not really about zoning. I did have a question about item 10, and that was 3.35.1.1. So 1 parking spot for every 37 square meters of gross floor area. And I'm assuming that's gross commercial floor area. And my question is to do with, and I'm going to use one example, is the plaza where, can't think of the name of the restaurant, St. Louis restaurant, and now 9 Round, the fitness place. It's at the corner of Webster and Innisfil Beach Road. And it seems to me, just anecdotally, I haven't counted them, but it seems to me like it's always hard to find a parking spot there. There's very little parking. And I wondered where, and I don't need an answer tonight. I see Mr. Montgomery searching furiously through papers, but I don't need an answer tonight. I just want to know whether or not they are in compliance with the 1 parking spot for every 37 square meters currently.
Hi, Your Worship. I can. Oh, sorry, Steve. Do you want to jump in there?
I was just going to say that the 37 they mentioned in the staff report is for other industrial uses, but Nick can follow up on that.
Yes. Yeah. Thanks, Steve. Just elaborating on Steve's comment. It is for just industrial, so mostly the stuff that's happening in Innisfil Heights. But with respect to St. Louis, I do know that development well, and they did provide above and beyond the bylaw requirement for parking. We actually asked them to modify some of their parking areas to provide for more landscaping space and snow storage areas in that plaza. Their own personal marketing departments asked for additional parking to be provided above and beyond our municipal standard.
Okay, thank you. I guess I just always go at a busy time. And then finally, a more general question. So the items that have found themselves into the housekeeping map changes, like 930 Ewart Street, 1991 Victoria Street, how do I want to word it? What constitutes finding your way into a housekeeping bylaw versus having to hire a planner and have the zoning amendment made, you know, at a cost to the proponent? Mr. Montgomery?
Well, I guess it's somewhat subject to interpretation. Obviously, if somebody's recommending or proposing a new development, obviously it's a private rezoning application that needs to go through a site-specific public meeting process. The purpose of the housekeeping bylaw really is to correct inconsistencies in the bylaw or minor changes that are not deemed to be substantially site-specific that would require an independent public meeting to review that development.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that. Any other questions or comments? Councillor Setti.
Thank you. I just wanted to share on the parking, just make a comment on that parking width again and the opportunity for narrower width to have more parking space if in a residential area. And as Mr. Scarrett had said, there's just reminding residents who are watching this or may watch it later that there is a requirement for a percentage, which I believe was 60% of your lawn must stay that. And you and also residents may not interlock the town's property on the boulevard. So sometimes I'm finding, we find that residents don't want to cut the grass or maintain the boulevard just in front of their house between their house, the sidewalk and the rest, and they're interlocking that as well. So just so they don't think that, they can pave and interlock over everything as we're looking at accommodating additional vehicles.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other questions for council or for staff? Seeing none, typically we would hear from the public at this time. However, we do not have any pre-registered speakers for the public consultation portion of this meeting. We will now ask the clerk if any person has emailed or phoned in their comments during this meeting. Mr. Clerk.
Thank you, Worship. We haven't received any comments via email, and I don't believe we've received anything by phone as well.
Thank you. So now I'd like to just thank everyone who has taken the time to watch this live stream meeting and presentation regarding the proposed amendment. We will now go to the recommendation, and I would ask for a mover and a seconder, and then ask council if they have any further questions or comments. So on the agenda, this is to receive the information, and it's item 4.5, and that's moved by Councillor Fowler and seconded by Councillor Nicol. All those in favor? That is carried. If you have not made oral or written submission in regards to this proposal before a decision is reached, you should be aware that the local planning appeal tribunal may dismiss your appeal. Anyone who wishes to provide comment may still do so and may also register as an interested party to be contacted before this application is further considered by council. Please contact clerk's office at innisfil.ca. Council thanks everyone for their participation or lack thereof, and we'll now move on to the recommendation to receive staff report TSR 201-20 and any comments provided during this meeting. Could I have a mover and a seconder for that, please? Moved by Councillor Arsati and seconded by Councillor Ices. All those in favor? That is carried. Next is the confirming bylaw. So that would be moved by Councillor Van Berkel and seconded by Councillor Fowler. All those in favor? That is carried. And finally, adjournment of this planning meeting, special meeting. Councillor Nicol and Councillor Waters, all those in favor? That is carried. So council, I believe we are to leave this particular Zoom call and go into another one if I'm not mistaken. And so you have 20 minutes to gobble down some dinner, and I'll see you back at 7 p.m. Thank you. Thanks everyone who's watching.